Good evening, everyone. This public forum on redistricting for single member District 9 is now called to order at 6:01 p.m. on Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, for the purposes stated in the notice for tonight's meeting. I know that Trustee Sullivan is going to be joining me in just a moment. Do we have any other board members that are online? I wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone. Dr. Shaw Ardalan is here. Dr. Ardalan, good to see you. And would you introduce the folks that are with you tonight?
My name is Jess Kelly. I'm the Dean of Math and Sciences here at University Park.
I'm Sandra Ventura. I'm a physics faculty at University Park.
Welcome, welcome. Our first order of business is a presentation by our legal and demographic team concerning what redistricting is, the role census data plays in redistricting, the system census data for 2010 and 2020, and initial proposed maps. So Ms. McBride and Mr. Gardner, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Trustee Kane, and it is really wonderful to be here at University Park. We're looking forward to sharing this information with those present and also those who are joining online. And if we'll go to the next slide, we'll dive right in because we have a lot to cover tonight. So that we're all on the same page and we have the proper framing for our conversation, we'll start with a legal overview about what redistricting is and what does it require of the census. And as you will learn from that discussion, redistricting is centered around the release of census data, and it's a reaction to that data, reaction to population changes over the decade. And so we'll then go into a discussion about the specific population data for the Lone Star College system and what that requires of us under both federal and state law. Redistricting is all about, in a nutshell, balancing population throughout the system. Total population, counting all the individuals within a single member district, both under 18, over 18, citizens, non-citizens. And so when we rebalance to make our single member districts more equal, there are certain things that we must take into consideration. There are limitations on our authority that comes from a consent decree that we'll talk about, and other things that we may take into consideration. And those are our map drawing principles or redistricting criteria that have been adopted by the board. And so those together form the limitations on how we can redraw our single member district map in order to bring it back in balance in response to the release of census data. Then based on that background, we'll show you some proposed maps that satisfy our appropriate response to the population change, as well as rebalance using the confines of the consent decree and our redistricting principles. And then we'll end our meeting after taking some questions and providing some answers, talking about next steps and the total timeline. So if you'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Paige Martin, to begin with the legal overview.
Thank you, Lisa. So for a brief legal overview, we're going to answer 4 questions, very simple questions. What, why, when, and how when we're thinking about redistricting. So the first, what is redistricting? Well, the technical definition is the process by which the boundaries of elective districts are periodically redrawn in response to changes in population. How do we know what the changes in population are? From the census data. So the government does a census every 10 years, an even numbered years, 2010, 2020, we just went through one. And then in the following odd number year, they release that data to states and other entities who then take that data and then say, do we have to change? Do we have to redraw our boundaries to respond to this change in population? And so Lone Star College system is currently divided into 9 single member districts. And you'll see on the screen the map. This is the current single member district boundary map. And this map was created in 2013. And so you'll notice that the districts aren't all the same size. District 7 is much larger than the other districts. But what balances the districts is not geographical, physical size, it's the number of total population in each district. And so, as Lisa said, the process of redistricting means we want to shift population, we want to redraw the boundaries so that the total population in each single member district is equivalent, not necessarily equal exactly, but equivalent. And so, as I said, Lone Star College is divided into 9 single member districts. And you'll see that the current trustees, this process is very important to them. And we actually have 8 because in single member district 7, there's currently an occupancy. But this redistricting process is important not only to the board, but also to you as the community members, because the trustees, they are responsible for representing the interests of their single member district. And so they want to know exactly who they're representing. And for you as the community, you want to know who your representative is, which district is your residents a part of. And so it's really important to understand these boundary lines so that you know who you're voting for and so that the trustees know who they're representing. And so this whole redistricting process is being driven by the entire board, but there's a committee known as the Redistricting Committee that's a smaller section of the board who is laser focused on this redistricting process. And that committee is chaired by Trustee Mike Sullivan from Single Member District 8, and he's joined by Trustee Ernestine Pierce from Single Member District 2 and Trustee Art Murillo from Single Member District 4. And these 3 are laser focused on making sure we all get this right. And they're actually going to meet tomorrow. They're going to meet tomorrow and consider the maps 1 and 2 that we presented, and also the feedback we've received from individual trustees, but also from the public, from the community. So the community has been invited to these community forums to provide feedback, and they've also been given a way online to submit comments. And so tomorrow, the redistricting committee is going to look at the maps, consider all the feedback, and then take recommendations back to the larger board for the next iteration of the redistricting process. So why do we have to redistrict? Well, every 10 years, the US Census data is published, including the most recent population statistics. And legally, according to the Texas Education Code, it requires a school board to redivide single member districts if the census data indicates that the population of the most populous district exceeds the population of the least populous district by more than 10%. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. We're trying to get under 10% when we look at the difference between the most populous district and the least populous district. When do we redistrict? Well, the law guides us in that as well. So Lone Star College has elections on even numbered years. And so the upcoming election, November 8th, 2022, is the first election that the Lone Star College system can react to this latest census data. And so the law says that 90 days before the day of the first regular trustee election, at which trustees may officially recognize and act on the last preceding federal census, you have to complete the redistricting process. And so if you calculate November 8th, 90 days back is August 10th. But there's another really important deadline that the board has kept in mind as they've thought about this redistricting process. In mid-July is when candidates can start filing applications to be on the ballot in the November election. And so that's a really important time. Anybody that wants to run to be a trustee, they need to know where the boundaries are and what district they reside in, so that they know where in what district they're running for representation. So the board decided that they were going to complete this redistricting process in advance, not only of the August 10th required statutory deadline, but the mid-July deadline date when it's open for candidates to file their application. And so the board has planned, and we're on track to complete this entire process by the end of June. So how do we redistrict? Well, Lisa's going to talk more about that. But like she said earlier, the purpose is we're redrawing these boundary lines in order to balance out the population, to give equal voting power to each single member district. And so we talked about the less than 10% criteria, but there's some other constraints, legal and practical constraints that we're going to talk more about. And so in December of 2021, the Board of Trustees adopted a process and a timeline, including all of the constraints and everything that had to be considered, but also multiple opportunities for the public, for you all, to give input, to give feedback on what you think of these proposed maps. So I'll toss it back to Lisa McBride now.
Thank you, Paige. If you can go to the next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about the census report that comes out every 10 years. And I think by now, everyone probably has figured that that really is a central piece of information. So let's unpack what is the census data? What do we get when we get the census data? First of all, that data comes to us in very, very small geographic units known as a census block. And we build up from that to get to our single member districts and to get to larger jurisdictions. But what we can figure out at that small level of a census block, and if you think about a census block, then the next level is a census block group and then a census tract. And a census tract is about the size of an election precinct. So we're talking about getting geographic information or demographic information in units that are smaller than an election precinct. And we're getting information such as total population and voting age population. And then there's another figure that we use that doesn't exactly come from the census, but it's based on the census. It's our best guesstimate, mathematical, statistically based on the census, which is citizen voting age population. We'll go to the next slide. So everyone completes their census by census day, April 1, for example, of 2020. And so total population is a direct count of everyone who completed their census survey about total population. And so that measures or counts all individuals in a geographic jurisdiction, whether they're over 18, under 18, whether they're a citizen or not, as of April 1 of 2020. So it's a direct count number. Now, sometimes because people don't fill out their survey accurately or don't complete it at all, there might be an overcount or more significantly an undercount, but it is a direct count number of individuals who are completing their survey about where they live and the individuals in their household. And because the information on the census survey includes age information, we can also derive a direct count number for voting age population, which is the number of persons as of April 1, 2020, for purposes of this census that were 18 years of age or older. There is another figure that we use when we are measuring for purposes of analyzing our obligations under the Voting Rights Act, which is the voting strength of minority populations in certain single member districts. And we use citizen voting age population. And the reason we use that rather than total population or voting age population, while those numbers, while important, they include individuals who we know aren't voting or may not even be eligible to vote. Total population includes individuals who are under 18, and voting age population, while they're all 18 or older, it includes people who are non-citizens. So citizen voting age population is at least a better measure. It's not telling us who did vote, who's registered to vote, or who meets other eligibility qualifications, but at least based on age and citizen, it's a better approximation of those individuals who can vote. And so therefore, we are measuring voting strength using that number as opposed to voting age population or total population. But as you might be thinking in your head, We don't measure on the census, ask a question about citizenship. So that is not a direct count number like the census is. That really is a statistical approximation based on the census information and survey information and other government records about the relationship between citizenship, voting age, and total population. So it's more of a mathematical approximation. And because it's a mathematical approximation, in addition to possibly having an over and an under count, there is a margin of error. So if we were to say that the citizen voting age population in a particular geographic area is 48%, that could be plus or minus 5 points. That could be plus or minus 10 or 15 points, depending on the reliability of the data. Because again, it's a statistical approximation. It's not a direct count number. But when we're talking about the 10% threshold, we measure total population because we want total population to be relatively equal throughout the system. When we're measuring voting strength and trying not to reduce the voting strength of a particular minority population over the decade, when we have to change district boundaries, we measure that, or we look at that in terms of citizen voting age population, because that's a better approximation of those individuals that are actually exercising the right to vote. You'll go to the next slide. So under both state and federal law, we are required to use our census information to analyze. Remember, this process is about balancing the single member districts across the system. So we use that data to analyze, are my single member districts well balanced? And one threshold measure is the one we've been talking about a lot today, which is that 10% threshold. But another measure is just looking at the total population number and seeing whether the total population of your individual single member districts are roughly equal. And both state law and federal law requires us to do that. It's not exactly equal. So we don't have to take our 9 single member districts, take the total population of the system divided by 9 and have every single member district be the same total population. It just has to be roughly equal. And the reason why that's important is we don't want overpopulated single member districts or underpopulated single member districts, because that affects the power of your vote. If you think about a pie that's cut in half, and you think about 1,000 people on one side of the pie trying to elect someone, and 100 people on the other side of the pie trying to elect someone, if you're on the side of the pie with 100 people, your vote has more power than if you're on the side of the pie with 1,000 people. And so none of Lone Star College System single member districts are that roughly disproportionate, but that's what we're trying to avoid. That's why we want roughly equal, so we have roughly equal representation and roughly equal power of the vote. And so we measure it 2 ways, looking at the raw numbers and then also looking at that 10% threshold between the most populous and least populous single member district. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to our demographer, or one of our demographers, Rocky Gartner, to talk about the demographic change analysis, because now we need to look specifically at what our data was in 2010 and what our data is in 2020 and what that change has been and what that change requires us to be. Heads up, what we're looking for is whether or not our most and least populous single member district have a variance of greater than 10%. Because if it does, it means that we are required to rebalance our single member district lines. So that is the trigger that sets off this process. And then from there, we have to change our maps, redraw our maps in response to knowing that figure. So Rocky, I turn it over to you now to talk a little bit about the demographic analysis.
Thank you, Lisa, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So this first slide is just looking at the 2010 data. So because that was our base year, everything was based off 2010 on the maps that you saw, that Paige was going over a little bit earlier. So you see in 2010, the total population for Lone Star College District was about 1.8 million persons, which is an average of almost 200,000 persons per district. And you can see there the balance there. Most districts were right around 200,000. Your smallest district was District 4 at 190,000. The largest district was District 9. And that difference was 7.3%. So that's the work that they did to get it within tolerance back in 2013. If we look at voting age population that we talked about earlier, and then also citizen voting age population, One thing that came out of, or several things that came out of this as well, is you see District 4 is 51.7% Hispanic. So this is now considered a opportunity district. So we will try to hold on to that at all costs. And we also have several districts that are what considered influence districts. And those districts would be districts 2, where your African American and your Hispanic population exceed 50%. So you can see that District 3, I'm sorry, it's 3 is just over 50%, as is 6 is over 50%. 2 is under 50%, but just barely. And I kind of, I'll allude more to that when we get to the 2020, because there's been a little shift there. But this is what it looked like in 2010. So we fast forward 10 years, and you can see there the growth in the district. The Lone Star College District is now 2,260,000, almost 263,000. Your average has gone from 200,000 to almost to over 250,000 per district. And you can see that now our percent differential has shifted dramatically. District 4 is still your smallest district at 202,000. You can see now District 1 is 279,000. And even if you look down at Districts 5 and Districts 9, they're well over 270,000. So that we do have some imbalance there that we need to correct. So that's the first criteria has been met, and so we will be redrawing boundaries and showing you plans tonight. What I'd like to point out too is that District 4 remains an opportunity district in 2020 with 56.7% Hispanic. And then we've got 3 and 4 remained over 50% when you combine your African American and your Hispanic populations for CVAP. So that they continue to be influence districts. And now 2 is also an influence district in 2010. You can see that it jumped up to almost over 58% actually. So a strong influence district there as well. So these 3 influence districts, this 1 opportunity district, when you see our plans layer that we've made, we hold on to these changes because we want to make sure that these influence districts and these opportunity districts continue to be there, while at the same time we're balancing population as best we can. I think this next chart shows how that growth shift happened. Yeah, so growth of almost 500,000 persons in Lone Star College during this time. This column here gives you an idea of how much population growth there was. You can see that we had 1, 2, 3, 4 districts that grew by over 70,000 persons. District 4 only grew by 11,000. So it was the smallest district before. It also got the least amount of growth. So it stayed pretty small. So what you begin to see here is why we have to make some shifts. So we got to balance these out as best we can following the growth. And so the bottom charts are simply the changes in absolute numbers and percent numbers. So you can see that the changes there in your percentages as well. So we did see a decrease in overall, now keep in mind in share, these are shares. So it wasn't a decrease in Anglo population overall because it grew by 19,000, but the share of the Anglo population in voting age decreased by about 10%. So that just gives you an idea how to read those charts. Thank you. So we're going to jump right into District 9. So this is the shift in District 9. In 2010, District 9 had just over 200,000 persons. Keep in mind that was right at the average, right? We made that happen. By 2020, that the population of District 9 is now almost 271,000. With our average being 250,000, District 9 is going to be one district where we've got to make some changes in order to balance some of the smaller districts and bring population into those as well. So some key takeaways here. Again, almost 500,000 persons, 476,314 persons were added from 2010 to 2020. The district population is now 2,262,847. Total population now exceeds that 10% threshold. So we're looking at 38.2%. Your most populous district changed from 9 to 1, and your least populous district remained District 4. So redistricting is now required, and the fun begins. All right, back to you.
Thank you, Rocky. So redistricting is required. As we talked about earlier, redistricting really is the process of redrawing the boundaries between single member districts. But what that really means to redraw a boundary means you're shifting population. You're making some boundaries larger and other boundaries smaller. Single member district number 9 is one of the larger single member districts. So we're going to have to shrink those boundaries a little bit. And as you can imagine, it's like a puzzle. We've got 9 single member districts. They're adjacent to each other and interlocking. Some have got to get larger, others have got to get smaller. And there's probably more than one way to achieve this puzzle and get everything back into balance. So how do we evaluate whether one move is superior to another move or more preferable? Well, we've got some constraints on our ability to make some moves. And then we have some map drawing principles that the board has adopted. Those two things together are going to be how we create a report card for our different maps, how we judge whether one map is superior to another map, how well they comply with the consent decree constraints and the map drawing principles adopted by the board. So let's talk about the consent decree. So in 2013, the Lone Star College system was actually all at large. It was not single member district system. It was sued by a group of plaintiffs to go to single member districts, and to resolve that lawsuit, the system voluntarily agreed to go to single member districts as part of resolving that lawsuit. And so the consent decree ordered by a court was entered, requiring the Lone Star College system to go to single member districts. And as part of that, the judge determined what some of those single member districts must look like. And so if you'll go to the next slide, we've got 2 constraints. The first one being that at least one single member district has to be greater than 50% citizen voting age population for Hispanics or Latino. And that in 2013 was single member district number 4 and continues based on your census data to be single member district number 4. The other constraint was that in addition to the opportunity district of single member district number 4, we needed 2 influence districts based on the combination population of African Americans and Latinos having greater than 50% citizen voting age population in 2 additional single member districts, which would be influence districts. In 2013, when the system originally went to single member districts, the influence districts were 3 and 6. Now they're 2, 3, and 6. And so a constraint on our ability to balance population, to bring it back into balance, is we've got to maintain single member district 4 as an opportunity district, meaning greater than 50% Latino based on citizen voting age population. And actually now we need to maintain 3 influence districts, not just 2. The order requires 2, but under the Voting Rights Act, we never want to have retrogression. So we know we can do 3. And so we don't want to draw a map that does less than 3. And so those 3 influence districts are single member districts 2, 3, and 6. So we have some constraints on what single member district 4 can look like, what single member district 2 can look like, what single member district 3 can look like, and what single member district 6 can look like. So those are constraints that we have to have in mind as we're bringing the entire system back under that 10% deviation requirement. And then we have some additional map drawing principles that have been adopted by the board. These principles combine, like Paige said, pragmatic things that you would want to take into consideration when you're deciding how to determine what the boundary between a single member district and another single member district should be, and also state and federal law. So some things in this list of criteria, and there are 9, are going to be very familiar with, to you. For example, the first one is easily identifiable geographic boundaries and political boundaries will be used to be the dividing line between single member districts. So we're going to use bridges and highways and bayous and streams to the extent possible to be the dividing line between a single member district or other political boundaries like an election precinct. We're going to really try not to split an election precinct so that we can be a good election partner with other groups that may be holding an election, other governmental entities on the same election day. So our voters can go to one polling place, have one ballot, and vote for all of the races that they're eligible to vote in, rather than having to go to more than one polling place on election day. So all of that is sort of encompassed by that first map drawing principle or first criteria. The second one will be familiar from some of the law we've talked about, and that is single member districts shall be, to the extent practicable, of nearly equal size. Not exactly equal, but nearly equal. And following that up, buttressing that, is map drawing principle or criteria number 3, which again should be familiar with you, and that's that 10% deviation. That 10% deviation is the trigger that makes us have to rebalance, and it also lets us know once we come under it that our job is done, that we've gotten back into balance. Criteria number 4, map drawing principle number 4, says that our single member district should be both compact and contiguous. Let's start with contiguous. Contiguous is a measure of the adjacency of your single member districts, that there are no holes within the systems, that all of your single member districts are touching on at least one point. They're adjacent to each other. And if you think of a pumpkin that you are carving up and drawing a face where you have eyes, nose, and a mouth, and you think of those things as holes, we don't want our system to look like a jack-o'-lantern that has been carved. We want there to be no holes in the middle of our system, meaning that if we were to take a pencil and trace the boundaries, the outer boundaries of all of our single member districts, we could trace those boundaries without lifting our pencil. That means it's contiguous. And so your current single member district system is contiguous, and each of the proposed maps that we're looking at tonight is contiguous. Compactness, there's no specific measure of what that is. It's sort of, we know it when we see it. And sometimes courts don't even know it when it's presented to them, because there's no specific rule. But what it does measure is both the physical shape of a single member district as well as the composition of the single member district. So there's physical compactness and political compactness. Physical compactness is the shape geometric? Is it square, rectangular, curved? Are there long arms and legs that are kind of unexplainable, that kind of spanned completely east-west of the system or completely north-south? Because if they're really these long, straggly arms and legs, that would suggest that one is making decisions based on one criteria as opposed to multiple criteria. When you're making decisions on the basis of multiple criteria, your single member districts tend to have more geometric shapes. They don't have to be perfect squares or rectangles. They can have some elongation, but we just don't want these thin, long arms or legs that really make it seem like we're just going out and grabbing specific population for one specific reason that's untied to any law or any map drawing principle. And then we also look at political compactness in terms of, are we keeping neighborhoods and communities together? And that's where we really need public input to hear about what is a neighborhood. That's really not defined in law. The definition of what is a neighborhood, what is a community, is for the public to determine, as well as for the governing entity to determine. People with like interests that should be kept in a single member district and at a single polling place for purposes of exercising their right to vote. The 5th criteria is, to the extent possible, we're going to preserve incumbencies by not drawing or redrawing single member district lines that would carve out a current trustee based on their residents out of their single member district. And that just makes sense in terms of the continuity of government. Because if you didn't have that as a principle, then every 10 years when you redistrict, then you would have 10, in our case, 9 vacancies on the board and 9 people running for election. And so that could be quite disruptive to the system. So in order to maintain continuity of government, we're permitted to have, as a map drawing principle, preserving incumbency constituent relations by not drawing out a current trustee out of their district based on residency. If you'll go to the next slide. Then the last couple of redistricting criteria, starting with criteria number 6, is where possible, the proposed maps, much like political compactness, shall maintain communities of interest and neighborhoods within a single member district and not split them across 2 single member districts. The seventh criteria is single member districts, to the extent possible, shall be drawn to avoid splitting county election precincts. But for example, if we have to cut across a precinct, across a single member district in order to balance population, that's a higher requirement, because that's a requirement under state law. So this particular map drawing principle would be subordinate to that. So we try to comply with that, but if we have to split a precinct or two in order to comply either with our consent decree requirements regarding what single member district 4, 3, 2, and 6 must look like, or the balancing population requirement, then we're permitted to do that. Then criteria number 8 really is a expression of what the law is under the Voting Rights Act, which is generally every 10 years when we rebalance, you can do so, but you do so in a way that does not dilute minority voting strength. So we look at what the voting strength was in the previous or the benchmark plan, and we try not to dilute it or retrogress from that plan. And so that's when we're looking at citizen voting age population and seeing how strong that population is in that single member district relative to other groups, both minority and non-minority. And so that's why that CVAP, citizen voting age population number, is important. For example, a group that was 52% CVAP is going to be influential and it even control a particular single member district based on citizen voting age population. And if they were that in 2010, and let's say in 2020, they're 55% CVAP, but you draw a map where they're 45 or 40%, that would be vote dilution. And so we wouldn't want to do that. And so that is why we have that number in mind, and we look at it, and when we're looking at the proposed maps. And then the last redistricting principle is that, and this is something that's common in many areas, is that you don't fix what isn't broken. So you look at the previous map, and that's typically a map that was approved by the court in our case, as well as the Department of Justice, because at the time we still had to pre-clear. Now we don't, our maps or anything that constitutes an election change. So we know that satisfies constitutional scrutiny. It satisfies both state and federal law. So to the extent possible, we want to continue to use a map that is a good map, but we know there is some imbalance in that map. And so we're only going to disturb that 2013 map to the extent necessary to comply with these other 8 principles and our consent decree to bring us back into balance. So our next objective tonight is to look at 2 proposed maps that actually satisfy the consent decree and satisfy the 9 redistricting principles. And I know we've talked about a lot today. As you're looking at these 2 maps, this is the order of things that I would think about. The first thing would be, have we come back under the 10% deviation? If we have, check. The next thing is take a look at single member district 4 under the proposed maps. Does it maintain over 50% Latino or Hispanic on the basis of citizen voting age population? If it does, check mark, satisfies one of the requirements of the consent decree. Next, look at single member districts 2, 3, and 6. Do they stay over 50% citizen voting age population on the basis of African American and Hispanic population combined? If they do, they remain influence districts, so check mark with respect to the other criteria of our consent decree. Now we're in the map drawing principle land. And so then we look at those 2 maps and see, are we keeping neighborhoods in a particular single member district? Are our individual single member districts roughly equal? Are they closer to the average size than they are now in 2020? Remember, now in 2020, our average size is about 250. We had some single member districts at 270,000 and 280, and some as low as 200. We need to have them all closer to that 250. If we do, another check mark under our redistricting principles. So that's sort of the order of priority in terms of looking at the 2 proposed maps. First, look at the 10% rule. Next, look at the consent decree, the opportunity, and 3 influence districts, and then look at how well they satisfy those map drawing principles. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to our demographer to go through the 2 proposed maps.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Sure thing.
Before if you look at this map, I want to point out a couple things. So first of all, the blue outline that you see is the 2013 maps that were drawn. So that's the original maps. And what we've done is we've shaded the new plan. So this is plan 1. So where you see color, if you will, bleeding under some of the blue lines, that means that district is capturing some population from the district. So, you know, a real obvious one is there's population from District 5 that's capturing population from 7. Because what we have to do is what, if you remember our numbers, our smallest districts are all in the south. So we have to move population basically from north to south. So there's a bit of a kind of a domino, a little bit of shell game. So we're going to make 7 a little smaller by bringing it to 5, but then we got to pull some out of 5 to keep moving population south. And then we, of course, move into District 9, which we'll zero in on here in a little bit. So just kind of wanted to show you how that trend looks. Now, this next slide kind of emphasizes, well, I forgot we had the numbers first, my bad. So I guess if we think about what Lisa's criteria is, the first thing I want you to zero in is right there where it says 9% differential. So we've got our first check mark. Your smallest district is still District 4, but we've added quite a bit of population there. In District 9, we've brought population of District 9 from 270 down to 260. Although it's still it is now the largest district, it's within our 9% threshold. You can see that we've brought balance. We've got many districts right at 250,000. So this plan does a good job of balancing that. If we look for our opportunity district, District 4, 53.4%. So still a district of opportunity. And then we look close at Districts 2 with almost 60% combined African-American and Hispanic, District 3 with 56%, and then District 6 with 51%. So they still remain influence districts. So I think that we've made all 4 of our check marks that Lisa has us looking for there. Next slide, please. So this slide is just kind of pointing out where we made changes. So these black circles represent areas where there were changes. And you can see that there are significant changes. We had to move population from the north to the south. Now we're just going to focus on District 9, I believe, tonight, because that's where our public forum is. If we want to go to that next slide, we'll talk about some of these moves in District 9. So starting out at the top here of District 9, you can see that we moved a significant amount of population from District 5 to District 9. So if we didn't do anything else, then we just made District 9 a lot bigger. But we did that because we had to move population out of District 9 to the south, and we did that in 3 different areas. So this first area here is right on the north side there, going right through Tomball. Okay, so this is Huffsmith Road, and I think this is Kukendall. I don't know if I'll ever pronounce that correctly, but I believe it's Kukendall Road that goes through Tomball there. Pretty familiar with that area. And then so this is where we brought population from 5 into 9, and then we go the next. Now we're going to go through and get a little bit closer to some of these. So this is district population where we moved population from 9 into 1. You see the green that bleeds under Grant Road, Spring Cypress, and Huffmeister Road. So this goes from 9 into 1. We're making 1 larger. Next slide, please. And then we continue down Spring Cypress Road to make 6 a little larger. Spring Cypress, Luetta Road. We've got some population here, some density here that we moved into 6. And keep in mind, 6 is one of our influence districts as well. So we looked for pockets of population. So we could keep the balance there that we needed in District 6 as well while we moved population. Next slide, I believe. Yeah, so then we're back up. This is where District 9. So once we move that out, then we use Kukendall Road and Huffsmith Road to kind of bring some population into 9 from 5. So again, similar, District 9 loses populations to 1 and loses population to 6. And then we gain population from District 5 to come to the number that we finally finished at there with Plan 1. Plan 2, we'll jump right into Plan 2. So again, the same idea, the colors are bleeding. It looks a little bit different because that was intentional. We wanted to see if there was more than one way to skin this cat, and we're able to do that. Let's look at the next slide. Plan 2 here, you can see 9.2%. So again, we're really tight. We're hitting those 250 average criteria. District 4 is still the smallest, although a little larger than the last one. But our largest district is now District 2 with 262,000. That differential 9.2%. If we look down here at District 4, 52.3% Hispanic opportunity district. Check that. We look at districts 2, 3, and 6 for influence districts. That's that combination of African American and Hispanic populations over 50%. You can see 2, we're right at 60%, 55%, and then you see 6 there at about 55%, a little over that, 56%. So again, we've got that last check mark as well. Next slide, please. The changes. So you see a bunch of black circles. Things haven't changed. We just did it a little bit differently. And so in District 9, the change is a little bit different. And we'll look at some of these next slides. So in District 9, 3 places. And the last time there, I think there might have been 4 places, but again, we did the same thing. We moved population from 5 to 9, again, going through Tomball. And then we moved population from 9 into 1 and from 9 into 6. We'll zoom in on those. So Main Street going right down through the middle of Tomball there, that's Main Street, moving from 5 into 9. Increased 9's population there, and then we removed population using Loetta Road. You know, one thing that we haven't talked too much about is trying to smooth things out where we could. We thought, you know, you want it, you know, we have some pretty messy looking boundaries in places, you know, and you wonder how we came up with those. And that was the group back then. We're trying to do the same thing we're doing now, where they were trying to balance population while at the same time create opportunities. So we smoothed it out there. So, and then this next slide, we use, again, a different part of Spring Cypress and Huff Smith, not quite as much, but we're moving again from 9 into 1. So just like before, we're moving from 9 to 1 and from 9 to 6, and we gain population in District 5 so we move population from District 5 into District 9. Next slide, please. So if we look at some comparisons, I think we can jump into these now, right? So this gives you an opportunity to look at District 9 with the plans there. So I think this is kind of nice. You can see that 271,000, we settled in at about 260,000 in Plan 1, 253,000 in Plan 2. So both within tolerance, pretty close to that 250,000 number. You can see some changes there, but really your voting age population stayed very similar in both of these plans. And the same with your citizen voting age population, things stayed really consistent in District 9. Questions and answers. I'll have questions, but I'll listen. I'll try to make answers.
Thank you, Rocky. Trustee Kane, we'll turn it back over to you for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that analysis. We're now going to open the floor for questions and or comments from the public. If you're physically present, I'm sure we can hear you because of the size of the room, but if you'd like to go to the microphone, you're welcome to do that as well. If you're online and you have a question, please use the action icons in Zoom to virtually raise your hand or post your question in the chat to be read aloud. But whether you're in person or by Zoom, please state your name and the single member district in which you live before stating your question or comment. And we'll alternate between calling on those in the audience if you have questions or comments and those who are online. So we'll start with anyone in the audience if you have any questions or comments. Please, and you're welcome to go to the podium or.
I believe I'll be allowed.
Okay.
My name is Jess Kelly. I believe I live in single member district 5.
Okay.
Up north, right before we hit Montgomery County. My area, and through some statistical analysis and demography I've studied, and maybe Rocky can chime in, I've noticed a growth, unprecedented growth, and an accelerating annual growth to the north. My question might be for Paige, though, is is there room for consideration of future growth as we do this, because we're committing to a 10-year map? And what I see is down on the southern districts, a potential disequity as we grow in this unprecedented growth to the north. And I'm wondering if that could be considered as a factor as we attempt to balance out I'm worried about the 9.2%. We're getting close, and I can see that by the time we hit this 10 years from now, we'll be out of balance.
That's an excellent question. I'm gonna turn it to Lisa. Thank you. That's an excellent question.
And I frequently get that question every 10 years when we redistrict. Can we redistrict, sort of forecasting for growth in the future? And the problem is the statute requires us to redistrict based on the information we have now. And redistricting based on where we might be in the future more than likely will put us out of balance now in terms of the 10% differential. Making a single member district that we expect is going to grow rapidly small enough so that it doesn't become the biggest single member district in 10 years that would take us out of balance. Typically, we would have to make it so small that it would make us out of balance currently. But it's a great question. But frequently that is too many constraints to put on us to be able to satisfy all of them, and also to be able to keep our influence districts influence as well as our opportunity district and opportunity district. But great question. But normally, because of growth, and remember, all of our single member districts are growing, just some are growing faster than others, and it's that relative rate of growth that can put us out of balance. And it's hard sometimes to forecast what the relative rate of growth is. We can tell which one is going to be the fastest growing, or maybe which one is going to be the slowest growing, but we don't necessarily know all of the pieces across all 9 of our single member districts. And it's that relative growth that in 10 years from now may or may not put us out of balance. We may not be out of balance, but in Texas, you almost always are going to have to redistrict every 10 years because of our population changes. But wonderful question.
Thank you. Do we have anybody online that would like to ask a question or make a comment? Is there anybody here in the audience that would like to make a comment or ask a question?
I have one more. I'm just
Sure,
curious,
absolutely, absolutely.
As an incumbent, and as we move these lines, it will be inevitable that we're going to have somebody up against the boundary line. And in that case, what do you do? I'm just curious.
You mean have currently, we have our proposed maps do not draw a trustee out of their district. And normally we do a pretty good job of not having to do that. But for example, those 9 criteria that we have on there on the map drawing criteria or map drawing principles, they're not all weighted equally. The ones that are statutory are the ones that we must comply with. So the statutory ones are near equal population, coming under the 10%, being compact and contiguous. And then we have some federal ones, which are our consent decree, as well as complying with the Voting Rights Act. All those others are pragmatic and practicable, but they're not statutory. So they all come at the expense of the statutory ones. So if we had to draw a trustee out of their district in order to balance population, then we would have to do that, or to satisfy the Voting Rights Act. But normally we're talking about such small population when we're talking about 1 residence that we can avoid doing that. A great question.
Any other questions or comments?
In the plan 1 versus plan 2, which way is it going to affect us as a Lone Star College as a campus? And if it is, we get to pick between 1 and 2. Who gets to choose those?
So we're having these public meetings because we really do want to hear from the public. What questions you have, what you like, what you don't like, which map you favor, which map you don't like, because that will be taken into consideration. But ultimately, it's a board vote. The board continues to take public comment in. So we have this first round of questions, or first round of community meetings. The redistricting committee and the board meet, taking those comments into account, and they come up with additional maps. So we're already working on additional maps that we're going to finalize on Thursday based on the comments we're receiving tonight, and all of our other community meetings, as well as online. I want the public to know that if you can't make it physically or through Zoom to a community meeting, you can always submit your comments or your vote on a map online at the redistricting website, and we are monitoring that. So we'll take all of that information in, and that's going to drive the next iteration of maps. And then we'll do another round of community meetings, just like the one tonight, to get more feedback, because we really do want to take the pulse of the public as to what they're liking, what they're not liking, what they continue to have questions about. Then we'll have one final public hearing that'll be in the board's normal meeting place. And then after that, then the board will have to make a final decision, taking in all of that feedback and all of the maps that it's considered.
Can I ask you one more real quick there? How will the borders actually make a difference to us as a campus? I mean, is it something would we lose or gain? Because as a faculty of this campus, that's my interest. And Plan 2 we seem to lose more Hispanic because of it. So would I rally up everybody in my district to come back to a meeting to say something about it? Or does it not even matter?
So it really does not affect who can attend or go to a particular campus, or any sort of vertical arrangement that you may have with a school district in terms of servicing students. This really is about what the different taxing unit boundaries look like with respect to each single member district. And it may affect, depending on if there is a facility that's on the edge of a particular single member district, whether that facility is physically located in single member district 5 or 9 or 6 or 7 or 8, but it doesn't affect how that facility runs or the community or the students it serves.
It's about the tax dollars going to the specific single district versus the other.
Well, it is about the election of the trustee, the population that is eligible to elect a particular trustee to represent it. That's what it would impact. Yeah. And you're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Great questions, great comments. Thank you so much. Ms. McBride, will you present the timeline and the next steps?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Timely. As we were talking about, this is an iterative process where we have built in multiple opportunities to receive public and community comment. As you can see, this process started back in 2021, kind of culminating in December of 2021 with the board adopting a process, criteria, and timeline on redistricting. There was a public education forum of the public on January 31 that educated the public on the process, the timeline, the criteria, and a little bit about the law of redistricting. And then the board met on February 9th after it had learned and done a deep dive on its census data to look at some initial maps and authorize those initial maps to be pushed out to the public to receive public comment. So those initial maps have been on the redistricting website, and we've been collecting public comment on that website. And then we've been going out to each single member district and hosting a community forum like the one tonight to receive community input on those two maps. On March 24th, which is on Thursday, we'll have another redistricting committee meeting, as I indicated earlier, in order to take in all those comments, both trustee and public, and to push out another iteration of maps. And then we will begin another round of community meetings to receive feedback. And so that process continues through June. On June 8th, there will be a public hearing on the maps after the board meets on May 11th to narrow down the maps to 1 or 2. We're probably going to have 5, 6, 7 maps that the board will have to narrow down to 1 or 2, to which we'll bring to the public in the form of a final public hearing, a little bit more formal setting. And then the board will take a vote on June 29th on which map will be the rebalanced map for the system. And as we indicated earlier, that date, June 29th, is before the statutory deadline of August 10th. That's the drop dead date by which we must complete this process. But it's also even advance of the first day for a candidate to file for a place on the ballot, which would be in July. So candidates will know as of the first day of file what the boundaries they must live within in order to be eligible to run for a particular seat on the board. Here's another way of graphically depicting that timeline that you have on your screen. And if we go to the next slide, What we're doing in between meetings right now is we're updating the website, it's constantly updated with information for the public, and we're holding community meetings. And if you go to the next slide, that is a listing of all of the round one community meetings that we've been holding. It's March 23rd. And so we're holding the community meeting in District 9. And we have 4 more community meetings, one on March 28th for District 1, March 30th for District 6, April 4th for District 5, and April 6th for District 8. And if you'll go to the next slide, when we do the second iteration of maps based on public input, we're going to do this series of meetings again in every single member district, beginning on April 18th and culminating on May 3rd. So we really want to make sure that we get every opportunity for the public to participate in this process and to have their views heard. And so this last slide that we have here is a reminder that if you're seeking more information about redistricting, you want to know when your community meeting is, or you want to see the most current map that's under consideration by the board and the redistricting committee, please go to www.lonestar.edu/redistricting, and presentations that we have made to the board and the community regarding redistricting are also housed there as well. So if you want to go back and look at one of these slides in more detail and really zoom in on some of the boundaries and the streets, you can do that on the website. So thank you so much for everyone's attention tonight. That concludes our legal and demographic presentation and the timeline. And I'll turn it back over to Trustee Kane.
Thank you. In closing, I want to thank Ms. Martin and Ms. McBride. Mr. Gardner, I want to thank you as well. I want to thank our technical team in the back for getting us all squared away and set up this evening. I want to thank Dr. Ardalan for making this space available. And I want to thank you, the audience, for attending tonight and with your questions and your comments. And just to repeat that we will be back for the second round for District 9 right here in this room on Tuesday night, April the 26th at 6 p.m. With no further business to discuss, this public education forum is now adjourned at 7:02 p.m. on March 23rd, 2022. The next special board meeting on redistricting is on April 13, 2022. And as has been pointed out, the redistricting committee tomorrow is going to hold a meeting that would be March the 24th, 2022. Thank you all very much.